The year was 1911. Aviation was taking flight. It's the year of the first Indiana 500. It was still a time of limited technology. People woke early to work their farms and businesses. But on Tuesday, May 30th, 1911, Memorial Day celebrations were just around the corner.
My name is Jennifer Foreman, and I'm a librarian at the Snohomish Public Library. The Snohomish Fire took place on May 30th, 1911.
I'm Chris Gee. I'm the president of the Snohomish Historical Society. Well, the fire started in the basement of the Pioneer Restaurant on 1st Street.
4 a.m., Snohomish, Washington. People as well as the wind were resting when the ringing of a bell struck. Many believed it was the beginning of the celebrations, but that was not the case. Few knew a fire broke out in the business square, starting in the Pioneer Restaurant, swiftly spreading across the block. In less than an hour, it navigated across the street.
The fire burned for about a half an hour, and then it crossed the street. And then, so most of the buildings at that time were wood buildings, and a lot of them were on pilings that were 10 feet, 20 feet or more in the air, so it was elevated. And those went up easily with the fire.
So the businesses that were in town, there was a variety of businesses, and each one of them individually lost personal property to that business. Some people lived where they worked, and so they may have lost their own personal property as well.
A crowd came flooding out from the Penobscot Hotel, barely having time to make it to the street. Miss Pearl started pulling stocks from her store. Firefighters rushed to contain the fire. Casualties were unknown at the time. The heat kept rising, eventually burning a fire hose in two.
A fire of the size is going to take time to put out. What most early firefighters, as well as probably modern firefighters now, are interested in is creating barriers to make sure that fire doesn't spread. A lot of the water that were relied on for fires in a town like Snohomish came directly from the river. And so you had a lot of people working to pump that water up from the river. So they had that, but there wasn't always the amount. When you think of a city block, think of a block in downtown Snohomish, and then think of both sides of the street of that block on fire. It's hard to imagine having enough water to get started.
Firefighting was a lot different than it is today. And so what little bit of resources they had, the fire in a lot of instances burned itself out, although they were fighting with what they had, the water pressure they had, and then pumping from the river too.
They were very lucky to have at least one stone, pretty good sized stone building that acted as a fire buffer in one place. So when they could get the fire fairly well contained, then the fact that those buildings will continue to burn or that the contents will continue to burn, that would have taken much longer throughout the whole day.
A brick building blocked the rest of the fire's path, leaving it nothing but the 13 buildings to feed on. After a few hours, the fire burned out, completely destroying the buildings it engulfed. There were people assumed to be victims of the flames, but when the fire died down, all were accounted for.
There were a number of taverns and saloons in the city of Snohomish at this time in 1911. Alcohol wasn't allowed to be served in Everett at this time due to prohibition. And the taverns were so popular that they actually set up tents and continued to serve their beverages while the city was cleaning up. So there was an immediate action in terms of bringing Snohomish back to life.
Going forward, businesses that were rebuilt, a lot of them rebuilt with brick or stone masonry, rather than at the time of the fire, most of the buildings were wooden.
Businesses moved. Plans were created to be rebuilt in brick. Pictures of both the rubble and the fire were captured by William Douglas, a photographer new to the little town of Snohomish.
William Douglas was a photographer in Snohomish, and he is the photographer that is credited to the very dramatic images that we see of the Snohomish fire. The ironic part and an interesting side detail about William Douglas is that he had only just moved to Snohomish. He was a fairly young man. This was probably maybe not his planned career to be a photographer. In the early 1900s, postcards became very, very popular. And the Kodak company actually developed a camera, a special camera that would print on postcard paper. So photographers were able, or folks were able to think, I'm going to be a photographer in a certain place. They could take those images and quite quickly turn them into postcards, which then of course meant they could go out and sell them right away. So it was a business venture for him. Obviously his passion later was farming, and he left and had many years to do farming. So he was a fairly young man when he came here to do that.
Even though the damage canceled the parade, people still gathered at the cemetery to pay their respects to the ones who sacrificed their lives for our freedom. May 30th, 1911 passed. The people of Snohomish continued to thrive even in the midst of misfortune. That spark is still burning in the people today as the Embers of Snohomish.